Members, we have 1 minute to kick off. Thank you. Are we ready, members? Can you please take your seats? Thank you very much. I would have said order in the council chamber, but Councillor English would have probably said 2 pints of Doom Bar and a half of lager or something. So.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was being informed of an atrocity committed by Kent Highways against biodiversity.
No problem. Right. Good evening. I am Councillor Dennis Spooner, the Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this adjourned meeting of the committee. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity... Sorry, are you okay, Councillor Harwood? Yeah, okay. May I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated, and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's meeting, as you all know, will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of their microphones and to remind them to turn off their microphone when they have finished speaking. Thank you for listening. We then move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillors Eves and from Councillor Holmes. Are there any other apologies? No? Thank you very much. We then move on to item 3, notification of substitute members. I am aware of one substitute member, which I think is Councillor Forecast for Councillor Holmes. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Forecast. I'm not aware of any visiting members this evening. Moving on to item 4. There are no items to be withdrawn from the agenda this evening. Urgent items. I intend to take the update reports in relation to the agenda items 10, 13 and 14 and any verbal updates as urgent items as they contain further information relating to the application or matters to be considered at the meeting. I also intend to take a verbal update in relation to an application we determined in the earlier part of the meeting last week in relation to the Wickes Superstore. I intend to take this as an urgent item to prevent any delay in issuing the permission that we resolved last week to grant, and I will ask Mr. Mackey if he could please explain that to you. Mr. Mackey?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. This is a brief verbal update in respect of planning application 21-500-866 for the Wickes site. It's more a point of clarification, but members will recall that we discussed the impact of the mobile food trailer on parking spaces. It was agreed that a condition would be imposed on the permission. For clarity, I wanted to highlight to members that the existing trailer in the Wickes car park is there with the benefit of planning permission. Therefore, the planning condition that we have recommended cannot require the removal of this existing trailer, but it will prevent any further installations, in any other part of the car park. So I just wanted to clarify to members that that was the effect of the condition, not to remove the existing, but simply to prevent any further such facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. Do we need to make any further recommendations in respect to that decision?
I don't believe so, sir. My point of clarification is that the wording of the condition will say no further trailers rather than no trailers.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. Are members content? Thank you. Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to item 6. Are there any disclosures by any members or officers? If you have any to make, please raise your hands. None. Thank you very much. Item number 8, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I would like to move that all the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Everybody content with that? Thank you. I've missed that out. Okay. Can I next take disclosures of lobbying? Could you please raise your hands if you have been lobbied? Right, if I go around the table, Councillor Cox.
Do I need to reiterate? I gave a list on the first time, so do I need to give, yeah?
You might have been lobbied again.
Well, no, I would have known that.
I think you probably do. I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm then hoping item 23 and 24, I think, are the only ones that are remaining outstanding that I've been lobbied on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Kimmons.
Yeah, I think item 10. That's about it, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Items 10 and 12.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Perry.
I'm on the old agenda, so it's item 18, or I think it's 11 on the new one, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Brindle.
Item 10.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brindle. Councillor Young.
Item 10, thank you.
And Councillor Mumford.
As before, and item 10 as it is on this agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. And I have been lobbied on item 11 and item 10. Thank you, members. Councillor Cox.
Can I just, as Councillor Perry said, I was giving you the ones I've been lobbied because I'd marked up my old agenda, which I brought along this evening. So if you want to work out which ones they should be still yet to come. Thank you.
I'm sure Mrs. Snook can do that for us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we now pass on to item number 9, which is a Borough Council proposal, Lock Meadow Leisure Centre. Oh, sorry. Sorry, members. Sorry, we are going with the running order. I do apologise for that. So it's item 11, which is Willed Cottage, Maidstone Road, Staplehurst. And I will call upon the officer to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Hope you can hear me. It's a bit noisy with this air conditioning in, but hopefully you can hear me. I'm having trouble hearing the audio. I'll carry on if members can hear me. So this is an application for the erection of a detached garage with office above, resubmission of a previous application which was refused under delegated powers as set out on page 20 of your report. So in terms of the application details, whoops. I do apologise, I'm just going to slightly go backwards, okay. Right, slightly different order than I had in my presentation, but this is the property. In terms of the dwelling house, sorry, in terms of the garage where it's proposed to be erected in approximately this position at a similar height to the height details are set out in the report. So it's a similar ridge height to the existing dwelling. You can see that the accommodation is more into the roof space on this proposal, so it's at 5.7 metres as the proposed ridge height, and it's a 4-bay garage that would stretch across to the front garden area of the existing property. This is slightly taken further back, showing the existing property, so the garage would be erected approximately in this position, spanning across here to the front. This is looking south along Maidstone Road. This is access into the next door property, so the house property is just off to the right here, off to the photograph. This is the tree screen across to the front of the site that was there when the officer did this site visit. And again, this is just a slightly closer view in terms of when you're looking at plan form, and the garage would be set back just behind the front building line of the property and extend out to the front across here. So this is the proposed 4-bay garage with accommodation above. You can see the location. It's forward of the most part of the dwelling house. In terms of its elevations, you've got a 4-bay garage to the front, and then you've got an external staircase here accessing this upper floor with Velux windows to the front. Couple of issues just to point out in the report. Obviously, there have been previous applications that have been refused on this site. And as set out, the site has a sort of a history of refusals for smaller garages, both to the front, and I refer you to page 21, which is the MAO 61591 application, and to the side rear of the property, which is the 070554 application on page 20. And obviously, it's had a very recent refusal under 2150160603, which is almost the same as the current scheme. The last refusal is a material consideration, as it was assessed under the provisions of the same local plan, and the council are also required to assess the application under the requirements of section 38(6) of the Planning and Compensation Act 2004, i.e. in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. There is also an expectation of consistency in decision making, which is enshrined in case law. The report sets out that the proposal is the same, as I've said, to all intents and purposes as that refused under the previous application in May 2021, with the grounds of refusal set out on page 69 of your papers. The report also sets out the conflict with the local plan, with the current proposals in terms of policies SP17, DM30 and DM32, with the main policy, which is at paragraph 6.08, and also where it is in conflict with the SPD on household extensions, see paragraph 6.09 of your report. The proposals would be located forward of the front building line, contrary to the established street scene, and be of an excessive size and height, which would not appear as a subservient addition to the host dwelling and would cause visual harm to the character of the surrounding area, contrary to established development plan policy. And the proposal is therefore recommended for a refusal. And I think in this context, it's quite, I'm just going to show members sort of a Google Earth in terms of context of street scene around the site. This is a Google photograph, 23rd of April 2020, which is the most up-to-date. This is the property here. And effectively what I'm showing you this in terms of just trying to sort of depict what is the established street scene along here. Obviously there is that frontage screening that you have seen to the front part of the site, but obviously what you haven't got is built form that transgresses to that front building line of the properties. So, thank you very much, members.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. We have one member of the public, the applicant, who wishes to speak to you on this item. Mr. Birkby, are you with us remotely?
I am with you.
Okay, you have, if you would like to speak, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris Birkby from Will Cottage, Maidstone Road, Staplehurst. We've submitted a planning application for a 4-car garage with pitched roof to be in keeping with the surrounding properties, and hope to make use of the loft space above as our home office. And it is not a 2-storey building as described by the planning officer. We have recently purchased the property in a very poor condition, and it is in need of renovation. We have quite a few outbuildings on the property itself that are at the point of disrepair, so we are asking for 4 garages so we can knock down the garage situated to the left of the property and the large structure located behind, which is also in disrepair. We are trying to match the garage to the existing house, hence the pitched roof with white cladding on the outside and Velux windows to the roof as opposed to dormers. This way our home office will have no visual impact from either side nor the roadside. The reason we are hoping to create a home office is because we have a small family-run electrical contractors that we currently run from our home, and if we do not get permission for an office, then we would have to look to rent a premises, and in the current climate we feel it is safer and more cost-effective to make use of an otherwise wasted loft space. We currently have 1 car, 1 van, a ride-on lawnmower along with kids' bikes, toys and everything else that needs somewhere to be stored. Our foster son will be 16 this year and is also looking to get a moped, which we will need somewhere to be stored, which we're hoping to store in the garage. We both enjoy motocross and have motocross bikes, which we also need somewhere to securely store. We have previously been targeted by thieves for our bikes. We have spoken with our neighbours on both sides before submitting our planning application, and neither had any issues nor concerns, and one neighbour even commented on the planning portal that he was in favour of the planning application. After our first planning application was refused, the Maidstone planning officer suggested that we move the garage to either the left or the right of the property and situate the garage level with the existing house and turn the garage to face the road. Then they would have no objection and would approve our application. However, if we were to do this, it would mean either filling in our pond and removing the wildlife or cutting down 2 trees. This would also make the garage appear larger and more visible from the road, as you would see the full front of the garage as opposed to the gable end that in its current location would be completely hidden by trees that can all remain in place without the current planning application. I would also like to add, in our defence, that we have only cut back the bushes at the front of the property as they were overgrown and out of control. Also widened the entrance by only 500 mil due to delivery and access issues, and it is still currently narrower than most of the neighbouring driveways. And as you drive up and down the roads of Maidstone Road, there are other properties that do have garages and other outbuildings that are set further forward than the main property. So this would not be the first garage that would be situated in front of the building. Thank you very much for hearing my reasons and taking the time to discuss our application.
Thank you, Mr. Birkby. Right. We have no visiting members, and before I open the matter to discussion by the committee, Mr. Bailey would just like to say something to you.
Thank you, members. Just one thing I forgot to miss out is an additional comment from the Staplehurst Parish Council regarding the application, and they do say, as a result of further information presented to the Parish Council and following consultation with Planning Committee members, the Clerk under delegated powers would like to withdraw the following statements. It is also disappointing to note that the applicant has already removed much of the head and trees shielding the site from the road, resulting in development site being obtrusive from the road and impacting on the street seen from the submission. So the Parish Council are withdrawing that from their comments that you've got on your paper. Thank you. Sorry about that omission.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. As I said, we have no visiting members, so I'll open it to discussion from the floor. And Councillor Perry, you are the local ward member. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, excuse me, I've got a lot of things I'm scrawling around. So, one of the pleasures I have of sitting on the planning committee actually is that one can be presented with a proposal or a report, and I can completely disagree with virtually everything it says. And I think, I'm sorry, James, but on this one, I do fundamentally disagree. If you read the paper, you end up with the impression that if there was a policy that could be thrown at it, it would have been thrown at it, despite the fact that actually what we're talking about here is not a house, it's not a big development, it is a garage that is much needed, because we do have security issues, particularly, certainly in my ward, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. And I think the point made by the applicant about needing a secure place to keep cars and other vehicles and equipment is extremely important. The other point I would make, and it's one of the reasons I called it in, that it is a local business, and I think having the office in the way that's been designed is extremely important, and we should, particularly in this current climate we're in, we should be giving that a huge amount of weight. But I'll just come back to the fact that it is a garage we're talking about. Now, we had no objections to any of the neighbours, none at all that I certainly have come across. In fact, as has actually already been pointed out, there's a considerable amount of support for it. Now, in planning purposes, I accept the point that this is a building north of the railway line, and technically you could argue that it's in the countryside. In reality, it is not in the countryside. In fact, I've seen more elements of the countryside in the town centre than I have on the A229. And I must admit, I found the photographs that were placed rather amusing, actually. I've never seen it quite so quiet as that. It's almost bucolic in the way the photos presented the A229. Normally, you see a chugging number 5 bus making its own personal contribution to global warming going along the road. And I would think that it's a slightly distorted photograph. It has no effect on the countryside or the rural area. SP17 can possibly be applied to this. I mean, I walk up and down this road on a regular basis. I know it really, really well. And to argue that it contravenes SP17 is really pushing your luck on this one. It doesn't. And it really doesn't. And this road, and I find it quite amusing, then in the report it talks about the street scene, the contravenes the street. If you want to see a varied collection of buildings in the borough of Maidstone, then come down to the Maidstone Road on the A229 at Staplehurst. You'll see every blinking design you can find, from Wealden cottages to Art Deco to bungalows. Some are set forward, some are set back. And again, the applicant was absolutely right. There are examples of quite large garages that have been approved by this council that are set forward. And I also would say that there's at least one brand new house on this road, not far from Wheel Cottage, a massive 5-bedroom, very nice house that was built within the last 10 years. And that was approved as well, so-called in the countryside. So that, if you can approve a large house, and that doesn't contravene SP17, and yet this garage does, then I'm sorry, I'm beginning to wonder what's going on. You know, it's a real. And the other issue I found in the report is it talks about excessive. It uses the word excessive. This is not excessive at all. You know, that's a very subjective term. As again, I will come back to the fact that it is a garage, and a much-needed garage. And when you come to paragraph 615, again, it sort of goes on about how this will have an adverse effect on the countryside. You can't really see the countryside at all from where this where Wheel Cottage is. So that this whole argument, quite frankly, is specious. It doesn't doesn't apply at all. And I'm really very concerned because it does seem to me that we can approve very large buildings in the countryside. My ward is full of buildings, and I will say developments, I'll use that in a very broadest term, that I think should never have ever been there, and we're happy to do that. But someone wants to put up a garage for genuine security reasons, which will not have an adverse effect on the street scene. If anything, it'll probably improve it, but it certainly won't have an adverse effect. That's a very subjective and, quite frankly, I think misleading statement in the report. I really do have concerns. I mean, we've okayed an enormous barn just down the road, massive. I can actually see it from my barn, and it's huge. And that was perfectly okay, apparently. I don't know what use it's for, but it's theirs. So there seems to be, we talk about precedent and setting precedent, there doesn't seem to be any consistency in this at all. So I'm really, really unhappy about this, and I want to move to approve this, because this is someone wanting a garage. That's all they want. On the A229, it's not offending anybody. It is not going to have any adverse effect on the rural countryside at all, and it should be approved. It will actually, I think, improve the whole area, actually, and there are no objections to neighbours at all. And for that reason, I want to move to approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Young. Do you wish to speak now?
Yes, thank you. I actually agree with everything that Councillor Perry has said about this building. It is not, I consider it not to be excessive in its size and form where it's being built. I've got an example of one, a garage which has been built. It's very close to where I live, and it's next door to a Grade 2 listed building and another house next door to it. The garage that has been built is similar to this. It's 2-storey with an office space in the roof with dormer windows. In fact, it is as large as the house that is situated next to, and planning permission was given for this. It's clearly visible from 2 properties, and it is visible from the road via a driveway. So I cannot see how this particular garage can be refused when I look at something that is, as I say, very near to me and bigger than the house that it sits next to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I think it was Councillor English, followed by Councillor Mumford, and then Councillor Harwood.
I'm baffled by the insistence that we should approve it because it's a garage. There may be reasons to approve it, but that's not one. Garages are buildings, they can have an effect on their surroundings, whether it's on the streetscape or anything else. So that's hardly a ground for approval. That if the committee are minded to overturn previous decisions, including an appeal decision on a remarkably similar proposal to this, then really we need to give reasons why. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we need to give clear and cogent reasons. It is incumbent upon the planning committee to do that when it grants a consent against an officer recommendation, just as much as it is when it refuses an application against an officer's recommendation. So we need to actually say quite clearly, if that's what members' views are, why this is acceptable now when it wasn't acceptable before. I'm not saying we can't do that, I'm just saying that it is incumbent upon the mover and the seconder or someone who supports that recommendation to actually make the case. I would hope that Councillor Perry is in that position with his local knowledge to actually say precisely why this is an acceptable proposal given the planning history. Because obviously we need to do that, because if we don't do that, whilst there is no precedent as such in planning, applicants may well look at the consistency of our decision making and argue that they should have the same treatment. So we need to actually set out clearly why you think this is acceptable. Personally, I think I am taking note of the parish council's change of heart, although that wasn't, I imagine that they have reviewed information and come to a decision differently. It would have been nice to know what the decision-making process was there, but it is important consideration that they have essentially withdrawn their objection. So, Councillor Perry, over to you, and colleagues, over to you to actually make the reasoned argument.
I wasn't sorry if I come back in.
No,
Councillor English is right. I mean, it's not about a garage per se. I was just using that as an example. What I was basically saying was that this development, whatever you want to call it, doesn't have any adverse effect on the countryside. So it doesn't contravene SP 17. I know it. I know the area so well, and that's my main reason. Now, if a planning officer says it does, and I live there and know it very well, and I say it doesn't, and in fact I can't even see the countryside from where Will Cottage is, I find it absolutely perverse, so I can't use that as an argument. So that is one of my reasons. It does not have any adverse effect on the countryside. That's the first point I would want to make. Yes, it's certainly, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and can I make another point? You mentioned previous decisions. I'm looking at this fresh, and I've always been told we need to look at each application in its standalone, and I'm looking at this standalone, and I don't see this having an adverse effect, on the particular location where it is, on the countryside at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Right, I have Councillor Mumford, and then Councillor Harwood, and then Councillor Parfitt-Reid. So, Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, our policy maps put this location squarely in the countryside, so it's in the countryside. SP 17 applies in that case. And SP 17 has two hurdles in it. One is, you'll see it reproduced under 6.06, is that the development will not result in harm to the character of the countryside. That's one hurdle. Councillor Perry says it doesn't. The other hurdle that it must jump before it can be built in the countryside under SP 17, the development must accord to other policies within this plan. And this development, while it may not harm the countryside, which is one hurdle, does not comply with 3 other policies. So that is why the officers have brought in SP 17. They're not saying it's harming the countryside. It must accord to our other policies. And it doesn't. Not only does it not accord to 3 policies, it's not in line with our SPD. So therefore, it is refusal. That is the reason SP 17 has been quoted, not it will harm the countryside. It's being built in the countryside and must accord to our policies, and it doesn't.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the problem we're faced with is that we are a regulatory committee, not a policy committee. And all of the decisions that we make must, by law, conform with the development plan, be that the local one or national policy. And the fact that there is such a recent planning history on this application, it opens us up to all sorts of potential challenges and issues with other sites which are, regardless of the perception of whether this countryside, according to policy, is real countryside, it is countryside. So therefore, we need to be really, really careful about our decision making. And like Councillor Perry, I hear the rationale given, though I think the size issue for a quadruple garage and home office is rather moot. This is certainly bigger than my house, which, I think is probably worth flagging up, probably and next doors as well. But, so it makes me feel a bit inadequate, really. But, like it's just a house. But I do have some concerns as to how we're going to overcome the policy obstacles to permitting this. There must be ways around it, through location, through built form. Could it be slightly different in terms of, could it, go around a corner so that the storage area for the toys and whatever is an adjunct off the edge, so you haven't just got this very kind of urban garage block approach of 4 garage doors. So I don't think it's insuperable, the challenge, but I'm not sure that this application is the one that we as a planning committee can in all conscience permit. I think it's another issue that the residential extensions SPD, that sets quite a high bar in terms of design, and for example, it's our only policy whereby we can demand things like renewable energy and all of the integral niches of wildlife and things like that, because it's in the inspector approved policy. So I think probably the way to do this is to give some guidance to the applicant, but refuse on this case, and then we get another application coming back which is more in conformity with policy. Because I think you can still get a garage and office and store on such a big plot. I'm just not sure that this location and this built form is the right one. And if committee were to agree it, I think it would have to add additional conditions in terms of design, in terms of renewable energy and things like that. So I think we're halfway there. And I think some of the issues around the fact that there are existing trees and so on, I mean, the problem is none of them are protected. They're not TPO'd or anything. So actually, they could be removed tomorrow and we'd have no ability to influence that. So I think, we potentially can get something here, but it's probably a different application, because I was toying with a deferral to see whether we could move it, adjust it and so on. But I think the changes will probably be too big, because it really is the image of the 4 doors and that office above it, which actually brings in other considerations. It's talked about home office, but then we hear it's for a van and it's to go with the business. So effectively, it's not really home, it's more a commercial application. So I'm more and more confused. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do feel this is an application which is hearts and minds, because I do actually agree with everything Councillor Perry said in terms of I can't see the harm, and that's what I was going to actually ask Mr. Bailey, because I've constantly been sat here and been told that you've got to show the harm, and that's what I was going to say. What is the harm? And I can't see the harm based on the location, based on the size of the plot, based on what the street scene looks like. However, Councillor Mumford has sort of given me a little bit of a lesson in what other things need to be taken into consideration. So I now find myself in a slightly different position. And I do agree with Councillor Harwood. I do not particularly find the building itself aesthetically pleasing as it is. I think it's quite blocky, it is quite commercially looking. I would like to see this applicant get a garage or get something to support his business, I'm all for supporting businesses in rural locations. But I think it needs to be something that is more aesthetically pleasing and less commercial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parfitt-Reid. So we seem to have a quandary here. Oh, Councillor Perry?
Yeah, no, I just want to come back. I understand where Councillor Mumford was coming from, because obviously SP17 then relates to all these policies, DM policies. But when I look at the DM policies, they're not really drafted with this. When you look at the natural environment, it's a whole list here. But you could say, yes, it doesn't apply. Well, it does apply. I think you would be pretty hard put, actually, to relate anything there to it, to this particular application. And principles of good design, yes, I understand that, but, you know, what do we mean by good design? This does come back to my earlier statement. It is a garage, you know. So, and there's another one here that parking standards. So actually, this improves the parking standards. I don't quite know why that is quoted as something. So I just don't see the relevance of most of these so-called policies to this application. It's a very simple application. Someone wants to put a garage on quite a large site in a very mixed, almost suburban-like street scene, actually, I can't see what the issue is. I really don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Now I'll come back to Councillor English and then I'll try and round it up.
I think I want to move an amendment that we refuse the application but give guidance to the applicant on how he could achieve a solution on this site, as proposed, sort of outlined by Councillor Harwood earlier. I would hope Councillor Harwood would second that as an amendment.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harwood, do you propose to second?
Yeah, I would second it, and I would add to the officer guidance informative, if that's what it is, that there also be some interpretation of the policy requirements, because we have a policy requirement in the extensions SPD to deliver attractive buildings which are sustainable and so on. And I think that that's what the informative should just almost list what the applicant will need to comply with. But as I say, I mean, like the Ward Councillor says, it's a big site. You will easily fit this building in on it. It's just not this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Before I put that to the vote, I'd like to ask Mr. Bailey to come back, and we seem to be grappling with or wrestling with the policy basis for this decision, and perhaps thinking about the possibility that there might be a better way of accommodating the applicant's requirements in a more policy compliant way. But if you could please explain that a bit better, Mr. Bailey, very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll start off with Councillor Perry's issue in terms of the compliance with the policy. And if I could just turn members to DM32. So if we establish that this is a building in the countryside, it is by definition in the countryside. DM32.2 bullet point 4, or IV, does kind of relate specifically to a proposal. And it starts, proposals to extend dwellings in the countryside which meets the following criteria will be permitted. And then point 4 says, proposals for the construction of new or replacement outbuildings, e.g. garages, should be subservient in scale, location and design to the host dwelling, and cumulatively with existing dwellings remain visually acceptable in the countryside. So in terms of, there are primary policies that you use to guide the assessment of a planning application. So you'd primarily turn to DM32 bullet point 4 because this is a garage. It's in the countryside, so you'd use that to make your assessment. And then you'd use your supplementary guidance, which effectively then, and it's summarised by the officer in 6.09 of the report, page 24 of your papers. And then effectively, I'm not going to go through them all, But as a supplementary planning document, that is material to your consideration in the assessment because it's been through the planned process and has been adopted for time. So we use that document in accordance with section 38.6 to assess, you know, how does this garage comply with the development plan? So then, you know, you've got, I'll just pick out particular properties. You know, it says garage and outbuilding should not compete with the main house. Well, your officer's report says this is almost the same height as the existing house. So it clearly cannot be considered subservient, and it's a substantial building forward of the most front of the most building line. And also it says should be sympathetically positioned away from the front of the building, away from the front of the house. So I won't go in terms of all those assessments, and I will just quantify that because obviously we do say clearly each application should be determined on its merits. You will find examples where you get certain garages, but the general principle is on an SPD is that if you've got this kind of established build line, if you're going to put anything to the forwardmost part of that, that's going to have an impact on the street scene. And in the context of this, if you're putting that forward of the front build line, you could be changing that character. And as the SPD does acknowledge, you can't just use landscaping in its own entity as a justification to shield a development, because again, that's clearly set out in the SPD requirements, because that landscaping is finite, it might die, it might be, you know, in the context of this scheme, there's no guarantee that that front hedges will be retained because this building is proposed quite close to the front of that line. You don't know in terms of what foundation design is going to have an impact on that hedgerow. So effectively where I'm saying is it's using the principles of the policy, and the key policy in this is DM32, backed up by the SPD, which generally puts assumptions around what generally is acceptable or not. And it generally does say that, you know, if you're going forward with the most build line, then that's going to have a greater impact on the street scene. So your officer's report acknowledges, because of all those matters, you haven't necessarily got that control in the impact on the street scene. You don't know that hedgerow won't be cut down, you won't know it won't be lowered. All those matters are not there for control, but the building will be there with that projection and that height forever and a day. I will come back to, if I just could raise one last point. Certainly in terms of, you know, it's a very large plot. Yes, there have been refusals, but I think it's because the applicant hasn't come and engaged with the council in terms of coming up to say, well, what is acceptable? We generally realise what the need is, and normally in most circumstances the applicant would come to and use our pre-application service and say, I want to put a house, these are my needs, and this is where I'm proposing. And before we get to this application stage, you know, we would then come and say, well, we would support that, no, we wouldn't, and this is where we would suggest you'd relocate it. Because at the end of the day, we're here to accommodate needs without creating harm. So that's how we would go forward, and we would go forward proactively on that basis. It is a large plot, and I think it's perfectly capable to accommodate, you know, a garage. This garage happens to be a lot bigger than the two previous applications that the applicant submitted in, and I would say, less prominent position. So the applicant, if I can say that, has gone a lot bigger this time to the front of the property, whereas the other ones at least were pushed further back in the site and of a smaller scale. So not only would, if there was a decision to refuse, it would kind of go against a previous decision that had been made by the council, and then the consistent argument goes, but it's also a much bigger proposal than the site has ever had before.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Oh, I just wanted to ask...
Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask Mr. Bailey a question. You say it has to be subservient, but obviously if it's going to be 2 stories, it's going to be quite difficult to get 2 stories that is going to be lower than the main building. How do you define subservient? Is it height, or is it floor print, or is it a combination? Oh.
It's all those. it's all elements of a building to make it subservient. It's the size, it's the height, it's the mass, it's the footprint. Because as I said, it's an ancillary, it's meant to serve an ancillary function. So you've got your primary function of your house, and then you have an ancillary element, which normally, you know, you've got lots, let's not forget, you've got lots of permitted development rights. A garage of this size, in this location, you've got huge amounts of permitted development rights that you can put in the back garden under Class E of the GPDO. So, you know, I don't, and I'm not professing to say what an applicant could do, but there are substantial permitted rights that you could put without having to come to planning permission. That the principal reason for coming for planning permission of this size is because it's forward of the most front part of the dwelling. That automatically requires a planning permission, but you go behind. The applicant could, as long as he's not doing 50% of his garden area, he could come up with something quite substantial, but the government have accepted that because it doesn't have an impact on the street. That's a national right that you, I, anyone can do in their back garden, slightly less in AOMBs, but we're not talking that here. But so there's, you know, there is a permitted right that an applicant can do anyway. There are height restrictions, but that's where we get to.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Can I ask Mr. Fitzpatrick, who wants to say something, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I think my point was simply, I think with what Councillor Harwood and Councillor English were saying is that we want to see something coming forward. I think the issue here is, I think as Mr. Bailey pointed out, is getting the applicant to engage in pre-apps to come up with a design that might be more appropriate. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Councillor English.
Can we at least vote on the amendment, because then we'll at least know where we are?
Yes, thank you, Councillor English. Sorry, Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I still do like the idea of the clarity of an informative being attached with just the kind of bullet point principles that the SPD and the local plan require for delivering this sort of an ancillary building. I think it is helpful in just framing the way forward. But I absolutely agree with the legal advice that the way to get kind of chapter and verse on that is through pre-application discussions, which are a fairly routine approach.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. So, in taking the vote on the amendment, can I just clarify that you are proposing the application be refused according to the recommendation on the order papers, but with an informative for the applicant to engage and to discuss with the officers ways of perhaps making his needs more policy compliant? Does that sum up what you're trying to say?
Yes, it is.
Okay, right. On that basis, can I please have a vote in favour of refusing the application, as on the order papers, with an informative requesting the applicant to discuss with the officers ways of meeting his needs in a more policy compliant way? Votes in favour? And votes against? And I don't think there were any abstentions. Thank you, members. So that application is refused, together with an informative to go to the applicant, inviting discussions with the officers. Thank you very much, members. Thank you.
We need just to do the substantive motion now.
I really need an L plate in front, you know. It's right. We now need to make that into the substantive motion to refuse the application as we have just recommended together with the informative. Can I please have a show of hands?
Nine, Chairman.
And votes against? Thank you, members.
2.
Okay, so that application is refused, but the applicant is invited to have discussions with the officers. Thank you very much, members. Are you happy to carry on, or do you want a comfort break? Okay, thank you very much. Right, item 9 is the Lock Meadow Leisure Complex. And I'll ask Mr. Reynolds if he can present the report, please. Thank you. Is Mr. Reynolds there?
Yep, sorry. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yep.
So this is a council application to extend the existing terrace on the rear southern elevation of the Lock Meadow Leisure Complex. That's it there. It's permitted in 2016. The site is located in the town centre, and in terms of principle, the local plan supports and seeks to provide enhanced leisure facilities within the town centre. As you'll see in this photos, the existing area is hard standing. It was formerly under the original permission in '96 meant to be part of the town square. Visually, the terrace would use matching materials as what is already on the existing terrace, and visually it's located on the southern elevation, and it's not widely seen from public viewpoints except from the Lock Meadow Leisure car park on the south end itself. Sorry. In terms of footprint, the red here shows the existing terrace with the red outline here to show its extension. This would go from 96 metres squared up to 278 metres squared. In terms of residential amenity, the closest residential properties are located over the other side of the river, 130 metres away. Conditions from the original permission, such as restricting its hours of use and no amplified music, would be carried over to this permission if it's granted. And there were no objections received from any local residents or from any consultees. So the recommendation is for approval as per the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. There are no ward members, so Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very struck that government advice is stating that we should seek beautiful buildings and beautiful developments, and then you look at this flank wall and it's facing onto the River Medway and an area that we're always trumpeting that should be, you know, it's the kind of crown in the jewel in the crown and whatever. And the fact that the residents in College Road and the other way have got to look onto this. And I just think, can't we do better? If we have got a more than doubling of that terrace area, at the very, and you know, having loads of decking and whatever out the back and new barriers and things, should we at least not seek something like a landscaping scheme? You know, when we permitted a car park outside Wickes for Audi last week, we said, oh, we've got to get more landscaping and more trees into this car park. And yet you look at that expanse of pavias and it's just grim. So I suggest that we should put our own house in order, and we should demand that there is a landscaping scheme attached to this so that they can dig some holes in the paving slabs and put a few trees or shrubs or beds in or whatever and just get it to look better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The planning officer said that not many people can see this. Well, I can see it from my kitchen, my bathroom, my spare room and my daughter's bedroom. Other than that, no, you can't. Everybody can see this from College Avenue and including the west side of College Road. What Councillor says is absolutely right, Councillor Harwood, but I believe there is landscaping with this because it goes round, and they were talking about a play area. So have we not been shown what's intended to happen as the whole part, as all of it, or is it just this one thing, the extension? So if it is just this extension, I think we should be shown the additional stuff as well, that was all part of the whole project, because I believe it linked up with round by where the stag was, and also taking out some of the fences that are there that separate the staff car parking area, which I believe this is where it's going to be built on. And I think there is more to this, because on the face of it, what Councillor Harwood says is absolutely right. What's good for the goose should be good for the gander. I've made relevance to that about Trinity before, us having the right size of things. So if what Councillor Harwood says is actually true, there is nothing else other than extend the size of this decking area, then I agree with him, we should see more. So what do we want to do as a committee? Do we want to defer this and get it back in? Because I think they've actually started doing it, from what I can hear. I'm not sure though.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to agree with everything Tony said there. And also, I don't think it's a particularly good argument to say that just because it can't be seen, we shouldn't be putting that landscaping in, because that landscaping isn't just for aesthetic reasons. It's, you know, to add greenery and biodiversity as much as we can. So I would like to see, I mean, it does look very stark and very bleak, and I would like to see something much more aesthetically pleasing. And, you know, our river, we really do need to make the absolute best of our river. And I often go by stretches of it, and it is quite dreary. And so anything we can do to make it more beautiful, I think we should.
Thank you, Councillor Parfitt-Reid. I'm inclined to agree with you. We should be making this proposal as green as possible. And we should be setting an example ourselves, because, you know, we can hardly ask other developers to do it when they can see perhaps we aren't. So, Councillor Harwood, are you proposing a deferment?
Yep, I will move that we have a deferral for the application to come back before us with a landscaping scheme attached to soften the impact and to provide a net gain for biodiversity from the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harwood. And Councillor Cox is seconding.
Seconding and reserve my right.
Okay, before we go to the vote, can I ask Mr. Rep Reynolds to come back if he wishes to?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, just on Councillor Cox's point, yes, there is other elements to the wider redevelopment of the site. However, it's not before us. The gates being removed was considered by Planning Committee in January of this year and approved, and that did include biodiversity enhancements to the southeast of the building, around here on the river. The play area that you referred to doesn't require planning permission, so that isn't being submitted either. With regard to landscaping, yep, fine. Could that be dealt with by a condition, with the landscaping details to be approved by Planning Committee at a later date? Or would you want that as part of this application up front?
Councillor Harwood, would you like to come back on that?
I think the deferral is to see the landscaping scheme, because we think that the river is such an important feature within our town that we need to adjudge that it is appropriate and adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood, and that is seconded by Councillor Cox. Does anybody else wish to speak? So in that case, can I have a show of hands whether you propose support the proposal to defer and ask for landscaping?
Chairman.
Thank you, members. That was unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we now move on to item 10, the Pancake Old Apple Store, Boyden Court Road, Sutton Valence. Okay. Can I ask you, members, would you like this to be presented? Is anybody prepared or wishing to speak against the recommendation? Okay, in which case I'm sort of happy to move that we grant permission according to the papers, seconded by Councillor Mumford. Thank you, members. So permission is granted for that application. Thank you. Oh, sorry. You'll have to bring me an L plate next time. Right, can I please have a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members. That is unanimous. Thank you. Comments?
Can I just note that yet again we have one referred back to us by the parish council, and we have no representation by the parish council. So I'm just not getting the reason why they can refer it to us and then not come here and represent the parish.
So I believe they did withdraw their objection, but after it was actually drafted and written up, I think that's what happened. But perhaps Mr. Bailey might know something about that.
Yeah, I mean, that is correct. You know, unfortunately, in this instance, the report had been written and it was on the agenda, and then the parish council then kind of realised by reading the report that that had occurred, so they withdrew their objection. But obviously, the time, effort, and energy had gone into doing that report before, so that is unfortunate.
Perhaps they need to read all of the papers first, then, and like do a little bit more homework.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. It is irritating, but there are some of our ward members and some parish councils which ask applications to come to committee and then just don't turn up. So perhaps we need to send some further advice to everybody to explain what the cost is of actually bringing these applications to committee. But,
yeah, I don't think it's just down to cost as well. You've got councillors that have had to come back to a second meeting to an item on an agenda that we've just waved through because they've withdrawn their what's it called? I've lost objection. That's it. I lost the words there. I do apologise.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor English.
At the risk of prolonging this, there's nothing wrong with a parish council removing their objection if the reasons for that objection have been satisfied. We may need to give some further thought as to what we do as an authority when those objections are removed, whether it's still appropriate to actually have the report go forward to committee. But did this suggest sort of semi-suggestion that it's wrong for a parish council to remove their objection or a member to remove their objection if their concerns are met is, I think, wrong. We actually want them to do that.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, we've got to understand that when a parish council are looking at these applications, the officer's report is not written. And so they are looking at the portal the same as what we do. And then if the officer picks up on their points, they will withdraw it. But they've got no information, only what's on the portal when they look at it. And it's during the 21-day consultation period that they have to comment. So they've got no indication of what the officer's going to say at that stage.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. That's a very valid point. I mean, perhaps what we're thinking of here is a situation where the parish may object, but then when they see the officer's report, they might decide they want to withdraw that objection, and perhaps we need a procedure in place whereby the item can then be withdrawn from the agenda.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Is that something we can discuss at a later time, Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it is a relevant point. I know, I'll just speak that. I do know that the last time a report or cost of reports coming to planning committee was done something around 2009, if I can recall, a long time ago. And it is a relevant point. I mean, obviously, with everyone coming up, officers writing reports, it's a relevant point. Members may wish to put a resolution on that. Is it time?
I don't think it's that actually needs doing. I think we need to actually just consider whether where a member of this council or the parish council, or in a rare case where it's a statutory consultee issue, has withdrawn their objection, whether we just simply withdraw when we have a procedure for withdrawing the application from the agenda. But I think that's what we need to think about, whether it's possible to do so. I don't think we need a detailed examination of the cost, because the cost issue here is it's not so much a cost issue. It's a question of freeing up time for everyone that would otherwise be wasted, and clarifying the situation so that parishes and everyone else are clear where we stand. So I think we need to think about whether when these objections are raised and are met, whether it still goes forward. And that's a standalone issue. It doesn't require a lot of research or inquiries.
Thank you, Councillor English. Does anybody else have any comments to make on this topic? Councillor Kimmins?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't come across very well at first, but I've got to say thank you to Councillor English, because he said exactly what I wanted to say, and I bumbled everything there today. I don't know what's up with me. It's this, I've had the AstraZeneca, so that's probably kicked in.
Thank you, Councillor Kimmins. Okay, so I don't quite know in which medium we sort of go forward with that, whether it needs a reference to SPI or Councillor English.
I think it's just a separate resolution of this committee, and because all it requires, it might need to go elsewhere once we've got an answer as to how we could do it, but at this stage I think we're just asking Mr Bailey and his officers to look into how it could possibly be done. Okay, is that a proposal? Yes. Okay, seconded by somebody. Councillor, I think Councillor Kimmins was second. So can I have a vote in favour of having this matter reported back, so we can advise members, or all members, all councillors and parish councils of the difficulties of dealing with these applications when they withdraw their objections at the last minute. Right, all votes in favour? Yep, I think that's unanimous. Anybody against? Thank you, members. Right, can we now move on to item 12, which is the woodland off Foxglove Rise and the Mallows in Maidstone, Kent. And I believe that Deanne Cunningham is presenting the report to us. Mrs. Cunningham, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This application relates to trees growing on council land and has been made on behalf of the Council's Parks and Open Spaces team. Whilst the proposed work relates to 3 groups of trees and an individual pine, there aren't any remaining trees in one of the groups, Group 1, that can actually be subject to crown lifting, and the individual pine tree has no lower branches beneath the height of 3 metres. Therefore, the proposal effectively only relates to groups G2 and group G3, which is a total of 7 sycamores, and they appear visually as one group, as you can see from the photos. The first photo shows G2 from Foxglove Rise looking north, and the following photo shows G3, and the final photo shows G2 and G3 from Foxglove Rise looking south. We've had 3 representations from neighbouring properties voicing concerns over loss of privacy and security, but this relates to trees and other vegetation that isn't subject to the tree preservation order. And in any case, TPOs serve to protect public amenity and not private amenity. It's also considered unreasonable to expect vegetation on adjoining land to provide security or privacy to an individual property. The trees in question, as you can see from the photos, are quite tall. They're up to 22 metres in height, and the proposed crown lifting to 3 metres for clearance purposes isn't considered excessive and accords with the recommendations of BS 3998, and as such it's considered acceptable arboricultural management. It's therefore recommended that this application is approved as per the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Cunningham. We have no local ward members, but I see Councillor... Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask you anyway, but there we are. Yes.
There's a few who wish they didn't have me, but yeah. No, I think this is a really interesting application because, as you can see from a number of the residents' feedback, there has been some recent works to this block of woodland which has really upset the locals in that the ground floor got trimmed out, and so there were lots of shrubs and kind of understory, if you like. And then, for some reason, nobody understands why, it all got grubbed and cut out. And now we're talking about raising the lower branches in what is effectively a block of woodland. And that's where the concerns about screening and security are coming in, because essentially a block of woodland which nobody has ever been able to gain access to because it's so overgrown is being, through a number of routes, made a much more open, structured area, and it's to the rear of properties with slopes down to their back fences. So that's where the concern has come from. I really do agree with the residents that they can understand the lifting by the footway, because obviously you need to be able to move along the footway, but why the whole tree group is subject to the proposal for lifting to 3 metres. You know, is it to balance out the group? Is it an aesthetic thing, or is it, you know, about balancing the trees in terms of their stability? But it does seem a little bit peculiar. You know, I don't think there's anything we can really do to oppose this. However, from an arboricultural perspective, however, I think we should add a condition that the cordwood arising, basically the branches cut off, should be stacked within the woodland for wildlife and biodiversity, and at least it would create some kind of barrier to people getting in there and doing whatever they want to do. And I think potentially, though we cannot demand it as part of a TPO application, I think that we should add an informative that ongoing maintenance for this woodland block should look to retain the understory of shrubs and other undergrowth, so that we don't open it up in the same way. And essentially that informative will pertain to our parks team, who, for whatever reason, went in there and cleared a lot of the vegetation in a wood which had never been touched, certainly in my living memory. So I will move that we grant the permission, but with a condition on retention of cordwood and an informative to say that future maintenance should seek to retain understory planting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holwood. Do you have a seconder? Councillor English, do you wish to speak now?
No, I think Councillor Harwood has covered it. I must say these sycamores are lucky Councillor Atkinson isn't with us anymore.
Goodbye, sycamores, yes. Okay, we have a motion before us. It has been seconded. Can I have votes in favour, please? That is a unanimous vote in favour. Thank you very much, members. Thank you, Mrs Cunningham. And we now move on to item, where are we? Lost count. 13, which again is Mrs Cunningham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, another application relating to council-owned trees made on behalf of the Council's Parks and Open Spaces team. With this one, I need to draw your attention to the urgent update, which amends the proposal description to that was stated on the application form. So the description should apply for crown lifting of 6 trees to 2.8 metres and thinning by 15%, as well as the cutting back of growth to give a 2 metre clearance from the house. The missing part of the description, the carting back to give a 2-metre clearance only relates to a few trees nearest the house. It's minor work and it's considered to be appropriate management, and as such doesn't change the overall recommendation. You can see the photos there show the tree group viewed from Bargrove Road. Then there's another photo showing the tree group from the medlars, and then the last photo shows the trees from the bridleway looking north. Again, we've had 3 representations from neighbouring properties, and these relate to the removal of undergrowth. Clearly, again, this isn't related to the TPO application. However, in this case, I understand that the Parks team are discussing with the residents to try to alleviate some of the concerns in terms of general vegetation management in the future. The trees in question form a linear group and are up to 18 metres in height with a radial crown spread of 6 metres. The proposed work isn't considered to have a significant detrimental impact on the long-term health of the trees or their contribution to public amenity, and as such it's considered acceptable management. It's therefore recommended that this application is permitted as per the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Cunningham. Councillor Cox, you are the ward member. I'm sure we'd like to hear what you have to say. And Councillor Harwood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Yes, I can see the representations, know the area very well. It is a thoroughfare, sort of north and south along through here. I think this is really a nod to management of pathway access. We don't want to destroy the bridleway at all. We don't want to eradicate this barrier as the residents sort of see it as. But I do think that people with wheelchairs, with prams, and indeed cycling along there would be of benefit and open up the access through there. But I think their point about the dog's mess anywhere through here, I know it's used, but I think I would like to also say, can we make sure we're putting the appropriate signage or making sure it is visible, because I know a lot of it in this area has gone, been eradicated, been bleached by the sun or even ripped down. So could we add an informative that if this is carried out, and it's obviously going to be by the borough, can we make sure that appropriate signage for dog fouling is renewed, and we will make sure that we put it in newsletters that we encourage people to carrying on picking up what they leave, or not them, well yes, but anyway. So I would like to move as on the papers. If that's okay, I'll pass on to Councillor Harwood though, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox, and is Councillor Harwood seconding?
Not until, I would like to speak, I think,
okay,
first.
That's fine. Carry on.
This application area, for anybody who knew this site before the Woodlands housing estate was built on it, was genuinely stunningly beautiful. It was Arcadian. It was Repton landscape parkland with ha-has, groups of statuesque trees, and I can remember the chainsaws going and the diggers ripping the tree line out from this area. It went on for months. I remember really grim sights of what went on with the fires and the nests thrown in the fires, and really awful things happened. And what we were told when that new housing estate went in was that the trees, the groups of trees and those trees that survived the onslaught would be protected, and it would remain a sylvan housing development. And we heard the same thing at Walderslade. And then, what you've seen is the trees were too close to houses, the trees were too close to paths, and the attrition, so probably 75% of the trees have gone. A lot of them were TPO, but they never came back. Once they were felled, they were gone. So what I think I'm seeking is, I'm a little bit concerned again that what we're going to see here is what we saw in my ward down the road, where you fillet a block of woodlands, but you take out the lower branches, you take out the cover, it becomes open, people start walking through it, it gets trampled, you lose the ground flora, and it stops being a woodland block and it becomes amenity trees in an urban estate. So I'm a little bit concerned, and I know that parks are talking about the potential for fencing and so on to stop that happen. But I come back to the point that I wonder whether we need an informative that there needs to be something like chestnut spar fencing or other round some of these tree blocks, just to ensure that they are not trampled and they are not radically changed once they're opened up, if the lower branches and the undergrowth, because frankly, to get in there to raise these by 3 metres, it's impenetrable. You're going to have to take out all of that hawthorn that's growing amongst them. You're going to have to take out the brambles. You're going to have to absolutely go through there. And think about it, 3 metres is, you know, it's quite high. It's you know, it's twice a person's height. And that's going to be clear and open. And I think it's really going to fundamentally change some of those pictures that you saw of what those blocks of trees are doing. And Vinters has lost a lot of trees this winter. They've gone round and they've looked at them and they've taken all sorts of trees out, and it's upset the locals a lot. So I just want some kind of safeguards that we are not fundamentally changing the streetscape and that we're doing something to protect the ground flora. So I think an informative similar to the last one. I also think we need an informative about retention of the cordwood, because again, from a biodiversity perspective, you know, the stag beetles and things around here, they need somewhere to live. So I'd add the cordwood as a condition, and I'd add something about protection and retention of the understory as an informative, if that's accepted by the mover. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Does anybody else wish to speak on this application?
Sorry, Chair, just a clarification. Sorry, Councillor Harwood, you mentioned something about a chestnut-style fencing. Are you still wanting that, or?
If we're looking at some way of protecting these tree group, the ground flora within these tree groups, I know that further up just further up the same footway, indeed, at Lower Fillimpits Wood, Maidstone Council, with the trust that runs the nature reserve, have just put in some new chestnut spar fencing to protect the woodland from trampling and tipping of garden waste and so on. I think a similar approach might be worthwhile for this tree block. So that's why I'm citing it. It's only an informative, but just say that, yeah, that protection of the ground flora, potentially through chestnut spar fencing.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. That all sounds very, very sustainable and bringing about net biodiversity gain, which is what we're all after trying to do. Right, does anybody else wish to speak on that item? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cox.
Councillor Harwood asked if it was okay. The only thing I would say about the retaining the cordwood, where do you see that being used? In between the trees themselves, sort of front to back, so that people don't cut through?
I mean, I would say it should be stacked in partial shade under the trees. So essentially, it's log piles under the trees. And it could provide almost a dead hedge type barrier to stop people cutting through to get through to the nature reserve.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Is anybody else? Right, is everybody clear what we're voting on? We're voting for the motion as in the papers, together with the extra conditions and the extra informatives. Okay, so votes in...
So, Chairman, the mover is happy to take those extra informatives and condition on board.
Okay. Okay, so can I have votes in favour? Thank you, members. That's unanimous. Planning Committee training. I'll hand over to Mr. Bailey. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I don't intend to do a sort of a long introduction to this item, because hopefully it's quite self-explanatory. You will realise that from the original papers that came round to your updated papers, you will see there's a slight change in terms of the recommendations coming forward. That's hopefully clearly set out in terms of the way that the current paper has been set out. So you can see, which is effectively on page 48 of your current papers, that I did put it in red, so you'll just have to appreciate that where it says update to report, you'll see that it's in a slightly different colour, shaded colour, so hopefully members can clearly see the difference where the report's changed. This is obviously a requirement of the updated constitution. As I said, I'm not going to set out what they are, principally parts 4.4 and section 20 of part 4.4, where there is a requirement in the constitution to carry out training. It's a lot more streamlined than it previously was. I think we were getting a bit into a complicated matter on previous training, so that luckily now the constitution is a lot more simplified, and hopefully we've sort of broken it down into new members, which also include substitute members, and also those planning committee members and substitute members who are returning back to committee after a break. So you'll see that in recommendation 2 on page 48. You'll also see the training programme that's on page 47 across the page. That's the suggestion that's come from the head of planning for the training programme. Obviously, if there are any specifics that members feel they wish to add to that training programme, now is the opportunity to do that if there are any specific areas. I would add that just on the ecology, that would also possibly look at biodiversity as well. So that training programme would include the ecology and biodiversity elements. You've also got the recommendation that those, if I can call them more experienced members, dare I say, if I can use that term, that have been sitting on the planning committee for some time. Obviously, the recommendation 3 sort of bites to those members, and there's training to be covered under enforcement, which is one element that I know the leader's been very keen to get some training programme undertaken on, and obviously the duties under section 38(6) of the Act, and obviously the development plan to update that. We've also then obviously put a recommendation for some specialist training, which is advisory for members to attend, and as I said, that's on page 47. From previous experience, we've also would like to invite members of parish councils to this training programme. And what I should add at the start, and I'd verbally request, is that invites are going to go out to all members, so it's not just P&R members, it's not just planning committee members. We would send invites to all members, because we have had some interest from members who aren't on those relevant committees who'd wish to attend. We've also put the recommendation that to deliver training virtually, and the reasons why we're delivering it virtually is because during COVID we did realise that lots of training went online. There was a lot more uptake from going online, because we all know people have busy lives, but they feel they can tune in to training whilst also maybe doing other things at the home and still listening to training programmes. And also it enables us to get out to a bigger audience and to not have control in numbers. If we come into this room, we have to limit numbers, but if we go virtual, we can have almost unlimited people on a Teams training event. And obviously, lastly, the recommendation is that we make a referral to P&R committee. You'll see, I won't spell it out exactly what it says, but there's a recommendation that P&R undertake the same training as members agree, and obviously that's for the reasons of the Planning Referrals Committee meeting. There are targets and time frames set out in that, which are clearly set out in the report. Obviously, newer members, we need to get those newer members trained up, and we will put dates in the draft training programme very quickly if members agree this session tonight, because it is important that we get new members trained up quickly. So you'll notice there are 2 induction training sessions that we'll put in force pretty quickly, and then we'll allocate dates and times in accordance with the training programme as well. And I think that's it. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right, I've had 2 indications to speak from Councillor English and Councillor Cox. So Councillor English first.
Right. I don't have a problem with the general outline. I think, as has been expressed certainly by Councillor Harwood and probably by myself over the years, we need a minimum of refresher training, because what we got into a system a few years ago where councillors who'd been on the committee for a while were getting the same training every 18 months, and it was dire. It was absolutely tedious. And didn't give us officers or members much benefit. Obviously, there has to be a certain level of basic knowledge, and the induction meetings are covering that. But a minimum of refresher, to be honest. And what we see here is at least an opportunity to get into the more advanced topics, which we really do need to consider, like design and so on. Virtual meetings and training are good, and I think we should do that, but it has to be said that some of the most successful training does involve interaction, where you are able to cross-examine and question officers and other members, so we don't want to entirely not do that. Secondly, I think it is worth mentioning that it's difficult at the moment, but some of our most successful training has actually involved going out on site and looking at bad planning examples and good planning examples. And a particular design tour that we undertook to London a couple of years ago, I think, was particularly impressive in terms of some of what was seen, in terms of both good lessons and bad lessons. I think the visit to Ebbsfleet showed us exactly how not to plan. And then we went on to 2 sites, 3 sites actually, that showed us how, in Chelmsford and South London, how to actually plan properly. So I think we should actually try and have, when circumstances permit, some more design tours. Finally, the chairman and myself have benefited from going to seminars run by an outside party, which I've certainly Design South East, I think it was called, which I believed we certainly had a subscription. I don't know whether we have a subscription at the moment, but we certainly had one. And they provided a considerable number of useful training courses over time. And we should not be ashamed of advertising those courses to our members and officers, because officers can go to some of these too, and taking advantages of courses run at a reasonable price with the subscription by other bodies, and that we don't have to organise ourselves. So with those, sort of additions being taken into account, which I hope they would be, I think that when opportunity arises, obviously you can't do some of these things at the moment, then I'm reasonably happy with the report. It's much better than what we were doing a few years ago, which was repeating the same things over and over again.
Thank you, Councillor English. Is anybody, Councillor Cox?
Thank you very much. I was going to bring up the point about actually going out and looking at things that have been passed is fantastic. I think it looks at what things may be that we've passed as committee, and then things that we shouldn't have, or even things that we put in and said you must have wooden weatherboarding, and actually when you look at it, we perhaps shouldn't. So I do think going out when we can is very important. I would also like to ask, are all of these sessions going to be recorded, so that if somebody was ill, or we get a new councillor in after a by-election or something, that they can come back? Or indeed, if after any of these meetings we go, hang on, we did that, you could go back and look at the training. I think it's important that we can refer back to these, and also we can, if people weren't able to make it, they can go back. I think the idea of asking or offering it to all councillors is imperative, because then when they come to this committee, or they're talking to a resident on the phone and going, not a problem, I can take that, I know we can get that done, we might not get them come to committee because they'll realise what they can and can't do. I think that is important. I would ask whether there are modules that could be done and undertaken on iPads or on computers that we can do, that we can refresh at any stage. And I think that then shows you what you've been listening to as you've been talked at, you're actually taking in and you're aware of it. So if there's something that can be done and acknowledges you've taken something in and you've answered a question or something on it, I think that would be very good to be able to have that sort of thing in our arsenal of training. But I think face-to-face, round the table, or dare I say it, even tonight when we've been told about SP17, that although it was nearly an hour, was a good refresher training on things like that as well. So I think it's important that we hear from the officers sometimes the reasons why they're giving a refusal or they want to approve. I think the more detail they give us, it's a bit like training as well. So I hope those points have been taken in hand, but I think recording them is a very needed addition, possibly. I didn't see it in here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cox. I think I agree with everything what you and Councillor English have just said. Councillor Parfitt Reid.
To be honest, I'm probably just going to reiterate what's already been said. I mean, I did find the training, the initial training, it's great when you do it the first time, but then when you're told you've got to come again and it's exactly the same, I would like to see some progression, and so obviously my understanding improves. I do think it is important face-to-face, because I think James made a very valid point when, oh yes, I'm attending the training and they put it on and then they're cooking their dinner and dealing, you know, I think there is a certain level of commitment that takes place when you actually get in your car and you come here and you sit and you listen. And I would also say that the trips that I have done have been really useful and I have actually really enjoyed them. And I perhaps came to them with sort of quite low expectation, but actually found them really, really useful. So the sooner we can get back to that, the better, I would say.
Thank you, Councillor Parfitt Reid. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, it's just happy with the report, but there's some bits that I noticed in the report. Permitted development prior notification. That will be the first time that we've actually come together formally for that kind of training. And that's been in for a long, long time. And that is the first time that we've seen training on that. We've had to blunder around ourselves. I've written some bits down in front of me. I think that this training programme also should keep in mind changes. We've got the Environment Bill going through, and that will change, and we'll be talking about biodiversity net gain. We're all aware of what a viability study is, and people are talking about 20%, 10% biodiversity net gain. We don't know what we're talking about. I've been involved in it, I've got more of an idea. But actually, I suppose everyone will be using the DEFRA matrix. And I think the committee need an idea of how it is calculated. So that is going to come more to the forefront after the environmental bill's been through. So all I'm saying to the officers is keep us updated with what is going through and run training sessions applicable to that. This one on permitted development and prior notification is long overdue, I think, as a training programme for the members. But thank you for the report.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Does anybody else have any comments? Sorry, Mr. Bailey would like to cut up. Mr. Bailey and then Councillor Cox.
Yeah, taking on board what members say, I do think members need to make sure we get and articulate in terms of the minute some recommendations, like I do get the design and study tool, because that needs to be a sort of a recommendation or a request, let's say, not a recommendation. If that's what members want, then I would suggest that that is a request from members that they want Mr. Jarman to organise, and I think it's a very valid point. I know the one that was done 2000 and I think it's 20, wasn't it? 2019-20 was very well received, I think, and it was I wasn't on it, but it was, from my understanding, a very good design tool and useful lessons learned. So totally endorse that, but I would request that members set out their actual request or what they actually want. This is your opportunity to put it down in black and white exactly what you want. With the recording matter, the intention would be, I certainly had a discussion with Mr. Jarman on this, the intention would be to record. The difficulties we have is in terms of GDPR is when we actually go down that route, we have to let people know who are on that training program that we are recording it. If we get dissent from that, then effectively we're into problems of recording, because what we normally do is hold that somewhere, and then we normally might put it on a YouTube. But I've got to speak to committee services on that issue of how we actually physically enable members to go back into those training programs. But there are issues around GDPR that we just need to be mindful of that and get consensus agreement that we're recording these. But the intention would be to record, but I'm just putting a bit of a marker there at this current time. And I think I've covered that, but if members could just clearly set out exactly what they're agreeing to tonight and what they actually want, then that's good for clarity.
I think we specifically do want design tours plural, because we had a local one and an out-of-area one. I would like to see us using our what training budget we do have appropriately to offer to actually make sure that members and officers have the opportunity to go to appropriate external courses where we have subscriptions and the fees are quite cheap, like Councillor Spooner and I were able to at a charming location in Folkestone, and I would like us to take on board the comments within the GDPR about recording modules where we can. I think everything else is more or less covered in the report.
Thank you, Councillor English. I mean, I would certainly welcome study tours. Sorry, Councillor Cox, sorry.
Thank you very much. I give way there to my learned member. I would also say that one thing that is good, and that actually James took me on a one-to-one tour of enforcement, and I know that is one of your really big things you want to do. I think that is a great way to go round and look at the other side of the planning that we don't necessarily see, James, and I think that was. You know, it doesn't have to be the same one, obviously. I'm sure it's ongoing, but there were brilliant things in that you saw that have happened at committee, like those trees on the Sutton Road that were far too close. And you need to see how enforcement works and the workload that is there, that enforcement are carrying out day in, day out, and that what we expect and what they encounter. I think that is a very good tour that we need to look at, and I think it deserves a briefing, if not just the tour. I think you could do the tour and then a briefing about it. I think it would make a whole lot more sense, but that was very good. So yes, I think we need to look at the money that's available and how we spend it, as Councillor English has said. But I certainly think we need to use the budget or we'll lose the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I think Mr. Fitzpatrick wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect, just adding to Councillor Cox's point, that it's also subject to resources. You've got enforcement officers, but you probably see how much work there actually is and how many people we actually have on the ground to be able to do all of that. But that aside, sorry, just on the recommendations, I'm kind of gathering that the proposal is kind of as per the papers, but with kind of like a set of informatives, so to speak. One which is to invite all members. The other one is to, I suppose, where appropriate, to go on appropriate tours, kind of like for design. Subject to budget, being invited to go on external courses. And subject to GDPR, recording of the training courses. Of course, the one other problem you do have with training and recording it is that some members will simply say, well, I won't attend the actual training, but I did watch the recording, which might be a bit of a problem. So, but yeah, that aside, I think that's kind of what the members have been asking for. Does that summarise that for you, James?
Yeah, I think that I've kind of noted that down. As long as we record those in the minutes, and I will liaise with Mr. Jarman and put those motions into action. Yeah.
Final point on members actually not watching it and saying they have we've simply addressed by including somewhere at the end, close towards the end, a couple of questions that people have to answer to prove of actually watching.
So I think there's a big difference between actually participating and then watching it afterwards. Yes. Councillor Mumford.
There's something that's going to happen this year that I think our training should take account of. At some point, the local plan review will be a material consideration as emerging policy. There will be a point where this committee will be using that. Yep. And at that junction, I think this committee need a briefing on what's changed and etc. Because even before we adopt the review will gain weight where we can start to use it. And I think a briefing when you consider it's gained sufficient weight to be considered as a material consideration would be useful. And that will happen sometime this year.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Cox.
A very small point. Taking what Russell just said about resource of officers' time, we collectively, that's the royal we, have many sites that we think we might like to go back to. So would it be opportune that we construct the trip rather than take up officers' time? That perhaps 3 or 4 of us got together and looked at sites around the borough and put the reasons why we'd like to see them, and to say, look at the density or the design of something or how the biodiversity has been achieved. So we put forward the sites we'd like, and then Lorraine then, as she, I know, organises most of it, but perhaps, would it be pertinent that would work? So we're taking the time to consider where and why, and then it go that way round.
I think it would be a good idea for councillors to actually say what sites they think will be interesting to see or interesting to go back and revisit. But I think at the end of the day, it has to be the officers to actually put the tour together and take on as many of the recommended sites that members put forward as possible. But over to you, Mr. Bailey.
I certainly think that when I have a chat with Mr. Jarman, I'll certainly put the sentiments of members, and I see no reasons why we couldn't go out to members and say, when we're arranging this design tour, and Debbie's going to come back to you in a minute on constitutional requirements for these design tours, there's no reasons why you couldn't put sites that you want to be included in that. We wouldn't obviously be able to include all of them, but we would be able to include a selection of sites that you actually want to see. So there's no reason why that couldn't occur. So I do agree, yes. But if I could ask the committee clerk to come back on the constitutional elements for these design tours, because there is actual wording in the constitution on that.
Yes, thank you. It's in the planning code in part 4.4 of the Constitution. I know Olivia's got hers out, so it's page 234 to have a quick peep. It does say there should be a regular review of decisions. Councillors should visit a sample of implemented planning permissions to assess the quality of the decisions. Such a review should improve the quality and consistency of decision making, thereby strengthening public confidence, and can help with reviews of planning policy. Such a review will be undertaken at least annually. It should include examples from a broad range of categories, such as major and minor development, permitted departures, upheld appeals, listed building works and enforcement cases. Briefing notes should be prepared on each case. The Planning Committee should formally consider the review and decide whether it gives rise to the need to review any policies or practice. So it is covered in the Constitution.
So that means that we can go and see a really good place in Holland, I know is very good, and Canada, there's one very nice place.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Right, does anybody have any comments on the list of topics, which is set out on page 47? The only comment I would make is on ecology. I wonder if that could be extended into sustainability and biodiversity. It's something where I feel that I am lacking in knowledge, and that is something I think we could all benefit from knowing more about.
Sorry, Chair, sustainability, so ecology, sustainability and biodiversity. Sorry, sustainability, are you talking about in a planning sense, or?
In what, sorry?
You're talking about in a planning sense, as in like?
Yes.
Okay, does that come under the ecology section? I didn't see ecology and biodiversity working, but...
Yeah, I mean, if it can be included within that, or perhaps it needs to be a completely separate section. I don't really know.
We can come back on that, but also to pick up on Councillor Mumford's point about the material. You are correct in terms of sections 38.6 and the development plan. My view is that that would be the appropriate training to bring in the weight that you attach to the Reg 19 submission, because obviously we're looking around the September time-ish. Reg 19 is our submission to effectively out to consultation, and then you're starting to gain more weight on a Reg 19 submission, because that's submission that's going to go to the planning inspectorate. So yes, that is a time when members of this committee, you'll start to see officers referring to those policies and starting to give them weight, and you as decision makers will be deciding what weight you apportion to those particular policies. So I think I'll add that into the section 38.6 and the development plan, and the weight given to emerging policy, if that's agreed by members.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey.
Okay. And I'll look at the sustainability, where we can fit the sustainability into one of the modules where it most neatly fits. Because it is an important topic in terms of sustainability. I do agree.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Can I have a proposal to go with the recommendation as on the order papers?
With the additional remarks that we've made.
Okay, thank you, Mr. English, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Brindle. So, all those votes in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you, members. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we now come to the last item on the agenda, which is the appeal decisions. I'll ask Mr. Bailey if he has any comments to make on them.
I think it's a better list than last time, I should say, that came to members in terms of decisions. I think it's, you know, they are as they are. There was one decision that I just wanted to pick out. Unfortunately, you'll notice on the Cloth Workers' Arms, in terms of that was a member only. I'm not just picking out member overturns here, by the way. I'm not doing that, but that was an unfortunate decision. I could understand why members went the way they did. Unfortunately, the inspector in that decision said that whilst he took account of COVID, you know, the decline in the wet beer industry is very significant, and they had produced enough evidence to show it wasn't viable. So that was an unfortunate decision. And obviously the Bell Riding School, item 11, Councillor Mumford will know it well. I think that was a member overturn, officer recommendation to approve, member overturn to refuse, and supported on appeal. So, as I said, you know, a good decision taken by members on that one, and that was principally one on the sustainability argument. You know, that was a traditional riding stable, etc. Wasn't a sustainable location, and it caused no harm as it was to the character and appearance, and new houses on that site was domesticating it. Apart from that, unless members have got any particular issues, I wasn't going to raise anything more.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Anybody got any comments on those appeal decisions? No, I would just comment on item number 4, which was land to River 13 Manor Close. I have to say I was bitterly disappointed with that decision by the inspector. As I recall, it was a unanimous decision by the committee against the officer's advice, but the officers did advise it was a very balanced case. I am very fearful that decision may set not a precedent, but it might compromise other land for similar back garden development. But there we are. The inspector's made his decision. That's it. We are stuck with it. There we are. Right. Anybody else? Anything else to comment on the appeal decisions? Okay. Brings us to the end of the committee. Thank you very much for your indulgence and comments. Much appreciated. And see you in 2 weeks' time. Is it 2 weeks' time? 3 weeks? Can't remember. Thank you.